Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, messieurs, dames. In English, we call this the graveyard slot, after a very pleasant lunch, for which many thanks. But anyway, I'll try and live up to the French word animé for this session, and try and keep my fellow panelists on their toes. I'm Michael Ward. I'm the director for UK Trade and Investment in France. I'm a part of the senior team at the British Embassy. What that means is that we work to encourage British companies to develop their business in France and also help French investors in the UK. And it's not too difficult to guess why we think Hinkley Point is such a good thing, because it's both. It's both trade and investment, offers huge opportunities in terms of both political and industrial and commercial engagement. This morning, we were looking at the world from quite a high level, both regulatory, political, and the investment perspective. We are now, with this distinguished panel, who I'll introduce in just a second, going to look at some of the more detailed aspects of how this project is actually going to work, because it will only work with the partnerships and the real collaboration happening at working level, at the level of commercial interests. I will start on my right. Robert Davies, who's the CEO of AREVA in the United Kingdom. Then Marc Lachaise, who is the head of procurement of NNB Genco in the UK. Serge, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, Klaeyle, très bien, who is both at a senior figure at EDF in charge of, if I get this correct, politique industrielle, but he also heads PFME, Partenariat France Monde Électricité. Voilà. Thank you. A very important figure in the supply chain in France, obviously. Moving further to my left, I'm very happy to welcome Jason Smith, President of Nuclear for Rolls-Royce, a key player in the UK in the nuclear industry. Then another representative of the supply chain, Keith Parker, who heads the Nuclear Industry Association, works obviously very closely with Lord Hutton. To his left, Bruno Boccard, of Boccard Industries, important investor in the UK across a wide range of industrial processes, but linking up with Cavendish for the purposes of Hinkley Point. And you are the CEO, I think, it's your company, isn't it, anyway, or your family company. And finally, but last but not least, Guillaume Puravet from Assystem, another one of the joint ventures with Atkins, which we've just seen now. What we're going to try and do this afternoon, perhaps slightly differently from this morning, is work through four key questions, which I'm going to ask different parts of the panel to comment on. Firstly, the practical issue of how the supply chain is organized, both from the perspective of the primes and of the supply chain, and perhaps drawing on, drawing on some of the differences between Hinkley Point and Flamanville from that perspective. What are the lessons learnt? Some of the practical contractual issues that the primes are looking at, notably early contract involvement, which is an innovation to speed along the process and build confidence early on. Thirdly, what partnerships are actually happening, and something from those involved on how that looks and how that feels. And then finally, picking up one of the themes that Dominique Minière mentioned this morning, some of the cultural differences, and indeed that came up in the presentation on the regulatory framework as well, which are very important, so we'll end on that theme. But firstly, if I may, perhaps I'll ask Marc to kick off with his view on how the supply chain is being organized and any of the issues that have sort of helped from or hindered from Flamanville and some of the lessons learned?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I think we need just to understand what we're talking about in terms of contracts. I'm sorry we see life in terms of contracts, but life is also equipment and a plant we have to build. But what does it mean for us in terms of building Hinkley Point? Hinkley Point is a set of about 200 main contracts. So this means 200 relationships we have to establish with suppliers so that at the end they help us or they even build for us the nuclear plant of Hinkley Point. How do we place those contracts? It's quite simple. I mean, procurement is not rocket science and it's not nuclear physics. We engage with the supply chain as soon as possible and as openly as possible. So this means we had numerous events called suppliers events in the UK, in France, even sometimes in the small part of Paris, which is British territory, which is in the British Embassy. And really we engage with the supply chain. Probably most of us have seen those events. We shared as much as possible the key dates, the organization, the allotment of the contracts, and the rules of the game. Based on this, we were in a position, and we still are in a position, to issue what we call PQQ, pre-qualification questionnaire, which is the first way to engage and to test the ability of the supply chain to be part of the game. Here we don't test the results and the past only, we check as well the ability for the future. For instance, a British company who's no experience in RCCM can have a chance if they demonstrate at the PQQ stage they have the right quality system to compete. And then after PQQ, we reach a short list. Around 5 is a good list because we have enough competition, but we don't mobilize for nothing, I would say, hundreds of suppliers because it's a cost and we know that to bid for us. We send ITTs and then we negotiate and we choose what's the best offer. So not only in terms of figures and prices, what's the best offer in terms of quality, ability to deliver, and clearly the fact that they can be partners with Hinkley Point. So that's the road. So just imagine that today we're engaging a journey aiming to have 200 key partners to build Hinkley Point, knowing that each of the partners, and I'm sure some of them can expand on that, will have to place dozens of contracts as well. So just Hinkley Point in terms of contract as a kind of huge pyramid with clearly EDF and AREVA on top, but a lot of contracts and quite a strong depth in terms of supply chain. Briefly, the question about Flamanville. I won't explain too much differences between Hinkley Point and Flamanville. It could take a full day, and it's not the objective, and it's not my job and my competence. But in terms of procurement, first of all, what is similar? We kept the same allotment, basically speaking. Why? Because we think there is a kind of optimum between having a minimum number of contracts. The minimum could be 1, but this means transferring all the risk to one contractor only, or having a lot of contracts like we had in EDF or EDF had in France in the past. For the N4, I think it was hundreds, which was at that time the optimum, but maybe not the case for an EPR. So we had the same allotment. AREVA was mentioning, Mr. Samama, this morning, the people. We kept, in terms of procurement, part of the people working in Flamanville. So we have today 2/3 of the buyers working in France and on the day-to-day still engaging with Flamanville teams, and 1/3 based in the UK, because we will come back later, we need to understand and to accept and to match the requirements for the UK context. What we do differently, and I can expand maybe on that later, is also that we engage earlier with the supply chain. We placed early contractual involvement, and we'll explain it later, to have, if you just have to keep one thing in mind, the supply chain working earlier with us, and I hope Bruno, Boccard, others can confirm that this is the case, and this is as well de-risking the project for them. So, to make it simple, 200 contracts, a fair and open process, and similarities to Flamanville, but as well lesson learned, making, I think, a better and earlier engagement with the supply chain.
Thank you, Mark. Could I perhaps pass to Robert? Mark mentioned this big pyramid, and it obviously starts to look rather more complicated as you go down the pyramid. I mean, you're sort of just below the top of the pyramid. How does that feel for you in terms of what Mark's just said?
Thank you very much. I'd like to continue the theme of what Mark said, and it's important because some 5 or 7 years ago, when we first went to the market, we took with us the touchstones of success, which are transparency, their fairness, and its clarity about exactly what is required. And what we said was, we need to have, it would seem sensible to have a marriage between those suppliers who are doing it today in Flamerville, but have never actually installed, operated, or undertake work in the UK, with companies who have and do undertake work in UK, who understand UK code standards and methods of operating. And we said that, and the market actually then produced what we've now got, which is a whole range of marriages between UK and French companies. And that is what we believe is going to be the optimum success for that. Now, to answer the question which you asked, which is how is it for us? As you know, our role in both, excuse me, in Hinkley Point C is that of the provision of the NSSS and the INC, is that for us, we sought companies in the UK who are willing to go into major manufacturing. And there's only one who stood up and be counted and said, I'm interested in looking at going into major manufacturing. And therefore, we've engaged with that company, and we'll see where that goes. But that's important, is to be able to understand very early on. We can't dictate to the supply chain and say, you must do this. The supply chain is going to be ready to come to us and say, I'm available, and I can then do it. So for us, we then have tanks, pumps, and, tanks and pumps and valves. And we're working very closely with EDF, such that we've now got an alignment so that we then have common packages that are able to go out. So that from the supplier's point of view, they are just looking at one understanding and one series of criteria that are required. So we've simplified it, we have an alignment, and we're now working much more closely together. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Serge, can I ask you how it looks from where you sit? Perhaps you could say a very brief word on what the PFME does and how it supports this process and any of the issues that come out of that.
Yes, okay, I will switch to French, if possible.
Allez-y, je vous en prie.
Bon, PFME, donc je suis là avec ma casquette PFME. Donc PFME, comme vous l'avez dit, c'est Partenariat France-Monde Électricité. Donc c'est une association qu'EDF a créée en 2012, pour embarquer le tissu industriel français pour les projets internationaux d'EDF dans le domaine nucléaire. Hors Chine, en sachant que sur la Chine, il existe déjà une association depuis une vingtaine d'années qui s'appelle PFCE, le C pour la Chine. Bon, alors, c'est quoi PFME? Qui sont les membres de PFME? Donc, en fait, il y a 72 entreprises françaises. Donc, en fait, c'est des entreprises essentiellement des PME, des ETI, mais il y a aussi quelques grands groupes. Alors, c'est des entreprises qui sont qualifiées, qui ont une grande expérience sur le parc EDF et qui couvrent, je dirais, l'ensemble des disciplines de la filière nucléaire, que ce soit du design jusqu'à l'aval du cycle. Bon, alors comment on participe à la mise en place de la supply chain? Donc en fait, nous on se positionne plutôt en amont par rapport à ce qu'expliquait Marc. Donc notre objectif, c'est de créer des partenariats entre le tissu industriel français et les entreprises locales dans le pays où on veut développer du nucléaire. Donc l'avantage de ces associations, il est évident, c'est d'une part l'acceptabilité du nucléaire dans le pays, ça crée des emplois, ça crée de l'activité économique. En termes de groupements qu'on peut créer, il y a des synergies fortes, entre la connaissance approfondie du nucléaire d'un côté et puis la connaissance du contexte local de l'autre côté. Je pense qu'en termes de compétitivité des offres aussi, c'est très complémentaire parce qu'on additionne les plus-values de chacun et évidemment ça ouvre des marchés supplémentaires. Donc après, comment ça se retrace ces partenariats? Ça peut être différentes formes. Ça peut être des JV, Ça peut être simplement des contrats de sous-traitance, ça peut être du transfert technologie à regarder au cas par cas. Et donc notre association, ce qu'elle essaye de faire, c'est de faciliter ces connexions entre les deux tissus industriels le plus en amont possible par rapport aux appels d'offres. Bon, donc les clés du succès, c'est évidemment l'anticipation. Hein. Si ça se fait la veille de l'appel d'offres, bon, je pense que c'est un peu trop tard, mais il ne faut pas trop non plus anticiper parce que l'objectif des entreprises, c'est de faire du business et pas uniquement d'investir sur des partenariats. Ensuite, je pense qu'il ne faut pas que ce soit non plus un partenariat one shot, one projet, hein, parce que je veux dire, c'est un investissement important. Et je pense que de ce côté-là, le programme anglais, avec tout un programme, permet, à mon avis, d'amortir cet investissement sur plus qu'un projet. Et ce n'est pas forcément que le new build, ça peut être après sur la maintenance ou ça peut être dans d'autres secteurs d'activité. Et puis, dernier élément, peut-être en termes de clés de succès, c'est il est utile d'avoir des partenariats entre PFME et des associations équivalentes dans le pays en question. Et justement, on a un accord avec le NIE qu'on a signé l'année dernière et qui facilite beaucoup ce type de connexion en amont.
Thank you, Serge. Keith, could I turn to you? When we've discussed this in the past, I mean, there are obviously some quite big challenges. You represent companies across quite a big range of size, including some quite small ones. So, and they are, of course, slightly more remote from some of the traditions that surround the procurement of a major project like this. I mean, how does it look for you and your members, and how do you make sure that these linkages can happen, and how can we promote them?
Yeah. Michael, as you say, NIA represents quite a diverse range of companies. We have something like 280 member companies ranging in size from the very large companies like EDF and AREVA through the major tier one companies who will be bidding for these major contracts to be let on Hinkley Point, all the way down to very small companies at SME level. It was evident to us when the new build program first became a reality about 2008 onwards that there would need to be quite an aggressive program of information and awareness raising among principally those smaller companies about the opportunities that were being created in the new build sector in particular, but also about the requirements that would be placed on those companies if they were going to be able to compete effectively. So we have worked closely with the principals in the new build program to try to get that information out to the SMEs so that they do have the opportunity to compete for the contracts. And it's worth keeping in mind that picture of the pyramid where you have EDF and its major contractors at the top, but the challenge then is to cascade the requirements from those major companies down into the supply chain. And I think we've had a fair degree of success in attracting new companies into the sector, but there's certainly more to do, because as was evident in the discussion this morning, Hinkley Point C is not the only project in prospect. There will be several others coming along. Companies need to be prepared for a range of technologies and requirements, but we also need increasing capacity within the sector, because it's clear that there is going to be a tremendous demand on the supply chain as we go forward in the next 10, 15 years or so. So there's still an awful lot of work to be done, but I think we are making progress, and we need to expand the supply chain quite significantly.
Thank you, Keith. Can I just pick up on this point of the pyramid? And yeah, it seems to be going quite well, but I think there's a general feeling we can still do better. Has anyone got any either from the sort of the supply chain side, if you like, or Marc, or indeed Robert, have you got any ideas on how you can make this even better? I know everyone's working incredibly hard on this, but if there are other ideas on how we can move things forward.
Of course, we can always do better. That's a good challenge, I think. Happy to try, but I would like help of my colleagues. I think what we can do better probably is to work together. I was mentioning 150, 200 contracts. The issue is not to manage 200 contracts in parallel. It's quite easy to place a contract, to manage a contract, if you have the right professional, the right skills, the money and the time. Managing 200 in parallel with very complex technical interfaces. Because at the end, what we have to build is a technical asset. It's one of the most complex and most beautiful assets in the industry today. So I think the challenge is how altogether we manage those interfaces. How we make sure that we know each other. How we make sure that we acknowledge that each one on his segment is a key professional, not only because it's the result of the process, but because it's probably something which is top of the industry. And when a valve manufacturer has a very specific technical issue that create an issue to the mechanical erection contractor in terms of piping, I think if there is not a dialogue early enough between the technical team to address this, we won't be able to deliver the project. So I would say to make it better, it's to work together, not to underestimate the risk of interfaces, and to be open and to find solutions together, because I think with the best of the French and the British supply chain, we have all the tools to overcome those challenges, but we should not clearly underestimate these interfaces. That would be my contribution to your question.
Okay, Serge, would you? Yes, please do.
Just an example. We were in South Africa, not so far away, and we discussed of how to put in place the collaboration between local companies and French companies. So the same subject. So I think what is useful is before the new build, finding some contracts on modification on power plants in order to test and to optimize the organization between the two. And I think it's perhaps too late now for HPC, but I think it's a good way to be on another business and to optimize the way to work together before, in order to be ready to be very competitive when the call of bid will be put on the table.
Okay, thank you. Shall we move on to early contract involvement? I think that one really falls to you, Marc, to explain it, and to some of those around on the panel whom it might benefit to react to that. Does that sound okay?
Okay, so I can start and then maybe ask if Mr. Boccard wanted just to explain what we're doing. So what's the theory, I would say, and what's the idea? Today, as we don't have the final investment decision, we cannot commit to sign the contracts because simply we don't have the money and we're not authorized to sign the main contracts. This does not mean that we still need to work on the project. So what we put in place, it's what we call early contractual involvement, ECI, which is a way to engage with the supply chain earlier, but with a clear legal framework. So an ECI is a proper contract, very often linked to the main contract. Although the main contract is not yet signed, most of the terms and conditions are agreed, and this could be the basis for, I would say, smaller contract in value, but which may add a lot. So what do we do in an ECI is we start embedding some people, other partners in our team. So we have in London people from AREVA close to our desk. We're going to have in the delivery command center people from Cavendish, nucléaire, Boccard close to us. So really we create the framework to have the supplier starting to work for the project, to be paid, because they spend quite a lot of money to bid, and it's time for them to also to receive some money back, so to be fairly paid for the hours and the effort and as well the knowledge they're putting at the service of the project, and to de-risk by engaging on some key issues like the schedule and the operation and the way we will, for instance, construct the power plant. So clearly the ECI is a tool which is quite powerful, which we learn, I say we as EDF in the UK, although the UK was doing that for a long time ago, I think. But we implemented successfully, and today we have a number of ECIs in the project with the main partners, and we plan to sign a few more to make sure that we have all the knowledge coming in the project at the right time, because it's really the right time to have the people who know what they're talking about engaging with our designer. And a good example, I think, if Bruno wants to comment, is what we're doing on the piping with your teams, maybe.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I think the Success 20 project is planning and preparation. And I think we've given ourselves enough time to be very successful. It took us 4 years to build the project, and that gave us the mean to develop the right type of relationship with our English partner, Cavendish, giving us an understanding how we should work together, how we should develop our relationship to turn this project into a success. So the first year has given us really the delivery of a joint team, and to make it stronger, we haven't done a JV, but we have started a company called Cavendish Boccard Nuclear for 2 reasons. One is to guarantee that we'll have 1 cap for every member of the team, so we guarantee the delivery strategy. And second is to really focus also on the future of the nuclear new build in the UK and the upcoming Sizewell and Bradwell projects. So we really want to capitalize and strengthen our position. After being awarded the preferred bidder status, we got involved into the ECI, which is really, I think, critical for several reasons. One is to capitalize on the experience on Flamanville. We are working currently on finishing Flamanville, and so the experience that we gain from Flamanville should benefit, of course, Hinkley. So there is a transfer of know-how between Flamanville and the Hinkley project, and that's very valuable. The second is really to start building the team with NNB and the other member of the FIT 7, so to understand what will be the key success factors to make this project a success. One of which is the planning. Planning is going to be key, and so we are working with NNB in designing the right type schedule. So we are in phase with the other member of the FIT 7. Our objective is, of course, to guarantee a total install cost.
Thank you. Guillaume, I don't think you're in an arrangement as such with EDF, as I understand it, but I'd be interesting to hear your view on how attractive this system is.
As it was agreed, I will switch in French partly, just to be sure, not making too many mistakes by using the language of Shakespeare. En fait, il est effectivement difficile pour nous, en tant que société d'ingénierie, de parler de mise en place de CI ou d'en faire un retour d'expérience. Néanmoins, on profite de la tribune plus pour expliquer qu'effectivement, en tant que société d'ingénierie, quand on intervient sur des projets qui sont, et je pense que tout le monde en est parfaitement conscient, qui sont identifiés comme des projets complexes, et qui sont encore plus complexes lorsqu'on augmente le nombre d'interfaces ou les problématiques de différences culturelles qu'il peut y avoir lorsqu'on parle de coopération franco-britannique, on peut avoir un vrai rôle à jouer. Et pour pouvoir jouer ce rôle pleinement, plus on sait être impliqué en amont, c'est ce qui a été évoqué aussi précédemment, plus on sait anticiper et offrir les meilleurs services et faire un investissement en adéquation avec les enjeux auxquels le client peut faire face. Il est évoqué aussi précédemment ce matin par monsieur Vincent de Rivaz qu'un des enjeux majeurs sur le projet était d'arriver à travailler tous ensemble. Si on veut arriver à travailler tous ensemble, c'est toujours mieux quand au départ on a cette capacité à comprendre ce en quoi nous sommes en train de nous engager, et c'est pas forcément sous la forme d'un contrat, mais plus sur la forme d'un engagement qui peut être aussi un engagement moral, sur là où nous pourrions nous attendre, nous, société d'ingénierie, pour accompagner le projet, notamment pour nous, Assystem, sur le côté retour d'expérience de Flamanville 3, puisque nous sommes fortement impliqués sur ce projet auprès d'EDF et d'AREVA pour en faire une réussite. Donc c'est ce type d'élément qui peut nous intéresser et qui est particulièrement vrai lorsque vous faites une JV, on y reviendra un petit peu tout à l'heure, où vous avez cette nécessité de bien identifier clairement les objectifs de chacun, les contours des périmètres, pour être sûr après de vous embarquer dans une aventure qui ne va pas vous mettre trop de problèmes en face de vous lorsque vous serez confronté à des difficultés qui vont être inhérentes à la vie des projets.
I was wondering too whether Serge or Keith, whether you saw benefits for perhaps lower down the supply chain from ECIs. I mean, we talked about quite high levels of the supply chain, and it'd be interesting to know what your, perhaps Keith, you'd like to say a word on that.
Yes, I mean, one of the things we've been trying to impress upon companies further down the supply chain is the need to start preparing now. You know, and it's interesting that earlier when Philippe from AREVA was asked what are perhaps the problems for the British supply chain, one was that that perhaps reluctance to start investing and preparing in the absence of a clear forward program of contracts and need for greater visibility. So we have been saying that, you know, if you don't start making those preparations, trying to invest, recruiting, training, those sorts of issues, taking advantage of the support that's available in the UK, then there's a risk that you may well miss the boat. So, you know, while early contractor engagement is clearly very important, perhaps at that higher level, I think it needs really to then be cascaded down into the lower tiers of the supply chain to ensure that they've got that degree of confidence to help them to invest.
Is that happening? Is that sort of that cascading process? I mean, I know you work hard at it, but is it really starting to show some benefits?
I think it is, but I mean, I think it's still a slow process because, you know, I think until perhaps we get final investment decision, there's still that question mark over the forward program. And while the other developers are also proceeding with their plans, as Vincent said this morning, they're still further behind than EDF. So it does take quite a high degree of confidence for some of these smaller companies to make the necessary investments, I think.
Serge, is there anything you want to say in respect of how that helps your members, as it were?
Oui, je peux dire quelques mots sur quels sont les résultats qu'on a obtenus dans la supply chain. Là, sur nos 60, on a fait un petit point là juste avant cette conférence. Sur les 70 membres, il y en a 60% qui ont trouvé un partenaire anglais et qui sont impliqués dans les appels d'offres dont parlait Marc. Alors bon, il y en a certains qui sont ressortis en preferred bidder, il y en a d'autres, c'est encore en cours, bon, il y en a d'autres qui sortent pas forcément vainqueurs, mais bon, je veux dire, l'objectif de la connexion a fonctionné. Et sur les autres, bon, il y en a quand même 30% sur ceux qui restent, qui, compte tenu de leur activité, vont plutôt être des fournisseurs de rang 2 et 3. Et je veux dire, dès que la décision finale d'investissement aura été prise, il s'agira de les connecter aux contractants principaux pour la chaîne de sous-traitance et donc de faire la même chose pour donner cette visibilité. Donc je dirais globalement, il me semble que on est dans des partenariats gagnant-gagnant et on a abouti sur ce projet par rapport à nos objectifs.
Good, thank you. I mean, what I'm hearing is that we're doing the best in the circumstances that we have, which is, you know, we talked about this morning, until we have the FID, we can't sort of, the starting gun is sort of being loaded rather than being fired. And, you know, it sounds to me like we are moving forward. I just wonder if I can move the conversation on a little bit to talk about one or two of the partnerships that are happening. And perhaps could I turn to you, Jason, to talk about your position as Rolls-Royce in all this, which is very significant indeed.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And I'll just give the interpreter a second to zone into my accent before it's translated. I don't speak the language of Shakespeare. Firstly, I guess just a few words about Rolls-Royce and France. Today, France as a country is the fourth largest country supplying into Rolls-Royce, in the sense of the fourth largest supply chain that we have. And in terms of customers, 75% of the wide-body aircraft for Airbus have Rolls-Royce engines on them. But I'm delighted to say that 70% of Rolls-Royce's employees in France today are nuclear employees. So we have a long history of working in France, for French companies, with French companies, and indeed working in the UK with and in support of French companies and increasingly in other countries too. We have a number of important partnerships, and I think to be quite brief, I would say there are 4 areas of partnership that we found extraordinarily useful thinking about the UK programme and beyond. The first one is our partnership with AREVA. In 2012, we signed a cooperation agreement to look at complex manufacturing and associated engineering with AREVA in support of Hinkley Point C and indeed with the EPR fleet in the UK. Now that's extremely important because it's the first project. It's the most important project for us because it's vital for the UK's entire programme, its nuclear programme, that project is a success. It's extremely important for our nuclear industry. The second area is, as has been mentioned several times today, is the fragility in a supply chain that hasn't performed for a number of years. So we have a particular position in the UK where we have continued to manufacture nuclear reactors for the defence business. So we have much more awareness of what is required to re-engage, reinforce and rescale a supply chain than perhaps some companies, because we've consistently had to do that. And it is very time consuming. You need to be very engaged with the supply chain and very supportive of the supply chain. So the second type of partnership we found extremely useful is the partnership working with companies like EDF and AREVA, working through the multiple supply chain initiatives, like the Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre commented on earlier, Fitness for Nuclear, where suppliers are encouraged to generally upskill and understand the quality requirements and so on, and become as familiar as they can with the pipeline of projects that the UK will see, because they need to be confident that they have the ability to bid for and successfully deliver projects that make them confident to make the investments in skills, capability and infrastructure needed to be a serious player in that area. The third area that's very important, I would suggest, is collaboration and partnership with other French companies. We are acutely aware that the experiences of French companies supplying for the projects that have been working is extremely invaluable. One of the key elements of partnership is knowing what you bring to it and being very respectful of what other partners can bring. So for us, to have a number of conversations with French companies who have earned their stripes in both delivering and learning what it takes to stand up and deliver in complex projects is hugely important. And the final one, I think, is to try and create some form of future together. So for us, again, partnerships beyond Hinkley Point C, beyond potentially UK shores, and thinking about what we and these companies can do together from the experience that we are forging. And for us, we consider that to be a vital element, and again, providing that confidence to make the right investments, to make Hinkley Point C a success, therefore to make sure that there's the right political and public environment to make future projects go ahead, and then to make sure that our industrial base, our companies in the UK and France, are a success as a consequence.
Thank you, Jason. Robert, do you want to add anything to that, given your footprint in the UK and your interest in this?
I just wanted to endorse what Jason said. The success of Hinkley Point, one could say, is actually being seen by how it is exported from the UK That's where the success will be. Obviously, it is a successful project, and size we'll see and what comes on. And for UK Limited, it is follow-on nuclear projects of different designs in UK. But actually, the success of this, being the first one, is being able for companies here together, UK and France, being able to export and springboard from there externally. And by doing that, Europe then has far greater punch than acting individually.
I'm just wondering whether either Serge or Keith can say something about some of the partnerships they've seen coming to being, without obviously betraying any commercial details necessarily, but just giving a sense of what is out there. But we've seen some of the bigger ones, obviously, but what are some of the smaller ones that you're seeing happening?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, I reinforce everything that's been said about the value of partnerships between French and British companies. Clearly, the experience the French companies have gained on Flamanville and other projects is extremely important, whereas the British companies can bring the local knowledge, the knowledge of the regulatory system and the standards to bear in the UK market. So there are complementary elements, and as Robert said, the prize will then be to take these companies into third markets. I mean, there have been, as Serge said, 70% of his members have already established relationships with British companies, which is very encouraging. I mean, there are examples, not just in manufacturing, but for example, Lloyd's Register and AREVA, I think, have linked up on the quality standards and consultancy element. Clearly, the larger companies, Bouygues, Lange O'Rourke by law, have already got preferred bidder status. So it's something that we will continue to work with. We've established in the last year or so a supply chain partnership. It's taken a little while to get itself established and agree its remit in terms of reference. It's only one of several initiatives that are going on in the UK, and I suppose one of the challenges is to ensure that all of these various initiatives are coordinated in some way, so that we don't confuse companies in the supply chain with too many organisations. So they need, as far as possible, a clear route to support within those organisations. But the supply chain partnership will be, or is, the principal interface with PFME. It will be looking also to forge relationships with the Burgundy cluster. They've looked at those models, which have been very successful in the French context, and also in overseas markets. So we want to continue that work, working more closely with Serge and his companies.
Serge, would you like to? I'm particularly interested actually in whether we're seeing. I mean, UK's got quite a long way to catch up, as it were, particularly with skills, renewal skills, and that's also a problem, of course, everywhere. Are we seeing some of the skills benefits coming out of some of those linkages already? Is it a bit too early to say?
I think what is important is the anticipation. The anticipation. It was said this morning. One of the weak points is perhaps the culture, the safety culture in some UK companies, which no problem of quality. Mr. Samama said it this morning. So I think it's important to put on place some trainings. I think what you do now, it's very good, and to succeed in this, I think it's important to have visibility, because you have to anticipate, because it's not from the day to the other that the skills will upgrade. And I think really this is important. So the anticipation, I think the examples, the preferred bidder, I think all had already a subsidiary in the UK or anticipated a lot this partnership, and due to this anticipation, they succeeded in this call of bid.
I wonder if Bruno or Guillaume, could you possibly talk us through how your collaborations came about, what you've learnt on the way, things, pitfalls to avoid, you know, some of the benefits, some of the surprises perhaps that you've come across on the way.
Quand on a décidé de bider sur le projet de Hinkley, on a clairement réalisé que notre filiale Boccard UK n'avait pas la taille critique pour être crédible, et donc l'évidence montrait qu'on devait trouver un partenaire anglais. C'était une évidence. L'évidence était pas aussi évidente pour trouver le bon partenaire. On est ravis d'avoir choisi le bon partenaire, et je suis sûr que Cavendish est ravi d'avoir choisi Boccard aussi. Si on a choisi Cavendish, c'est qu'on était différents mais très complémentaires. Complémentaires parce que Cavendish a une référence nucléaire incroyable en Grande-Bretagne, puisqu'il gère en partie tous les sous-marins atomiques de la Navy. Donc ont une connotation nucléaire importante, donc c'est dans leur ADN. Deuxième, c'est qu'ils ont aussi une véritable compétence pour gérer des grands projets. Ils viennent de finir la construction de 2 porte-avions, chacun faisant 1,5 fois plus la taille que le Charles de Gaulle. Donc ils ont véritablement cette culture nucléaire et cette expérience, cette organisation sur la gestion des grands projets. Et donc on était complémentaires, et notre mariage, en fait, est d'abord passé par 4 ans de fiançailles. Et c'est EDF NNB qui nous a mariés en nous passant le Preferred Bidder Status. Ces 4 ans nous ont permis déjà de nous connaître, nous comprendre et nous apprécier. Et véritablement, je pense que ça a été, même si ces 4 ans ont été très coûteux et risqués, puisqu'on n'était pas évidemment garanti du résultat, ça nous a permis de nous apprécier et de construire une véritable équipe, d'où la naissance de Cavendish Boccard Nucléaire. Les pitfalls, d'abord il y a le problème de la langue, qui a été essentiellement un des problèmes de miscommunication entre nos équipes. Ça c'était le premier. Le deuxième, c'est les management styles. Cavendish a un management style différent de Boccard, et donc il a fallu qu'on trouve un management style qui soit commun, qui soit apprécié et qui soit utile, bien évidemment, pour le projet. Le troisième, c'est de pouvoir bien communiquer sur nos expertises et nos expériences. Boccard amenant l'expérience et la référence qualité nucléaire française, Cavendish amenant la même, mais pour la partie de la Grande-Bretagne. Et l'idée était véritablement, durant ces 4 ans, de mettre à plat et de garantir que nous soyons dans les specs et dans les conditions required pour le projet. Voilà.
Guillaume, I mean, you're traditionally competitors with your partner, so that'll be interesting to hear that story.
En fait, à l'époque, lorsque la joint venture avec Atkins a été décidée en termes de mise en place, c'était pas forcément pour le projet HPC, en tout cas c'était plus pour aller à l'export, pour aller attaquer le marché nucléaire un petit peu partout en dehors des territoires sur lesquels Atkins comme Assystem étaient présents, pour qu'on puisse s'appuyer à la fois sur l'expérience d'Assystem dans le nucléaire et sur la présence plus forte à l'international des équipes Atkins. Et puis est venu sur la table le projet HPC, où on s'est rendu compte aussi que pour nos besoins en France, il y avait la nécessité d'intégrer ce qui a été évoqué aussi notamment tout à l'heure sur le UK contexte, et que nous seuls à Assystem, même si nous étions globalement assez présents en Angleterre avec des équipes en propre, il était peut-être préférable, pour le bénéfice de notre client, de le faire via une association avec notre joint venture qui avait prouvé que ça pouvait fonctionner à l'étranger, pour s'assurer qu'on allait apporter l'ensemble des compétences qui étaient nécessaires pour la réussite des projets. Et donc du coup, ce qui était important, c'est que dès le départ, les règles et les rôles étaient clairement identifiés, ce qui a permis de faire une évolution du positionnement, puisqu'au départ, les territoires respectifs des 2 entreprises n'étaient pas concernés pour la joint venture. Mais le fait d'avoir posé les règles, c'était plus facile par la suite de commencer à la faire évoluer pour répondre in fine aux besoins de positionnement des 2 entreprises qui avaient un intérêt commun à faire en sorte que pour des besoins en France, on puisse le faire, et que peut-être demain, pour des besoins en Angleterre, ce soit préférentiellement notre JV qui intervienne plutôt que Assystem seul ou Atkins seul aujourd'hui auprès de NNB. Et donc la deuxième chose qui est un facteur de succès, c'est le commencement, puisqu'on a beau avoir posé les règles, Il faut arriver à bien démarrer, c'est ce qu'on appelle aussi les quick wins. C'est-à-dire que si à un moment donné on met en place des structures mais qu'on n'arrive jamais à gagner un seul sujet, peut se poser assez rapidement la question de l'intérêt finalement de ce qui a été mis en œuvre. Donc on a eu cette chance d'avoir un certain nombre de succès, peut-être pas sur des volumes aussi importants que ce qu'on avait imaginé à l'époque. On avait été quand même relativement précautionneux sur les structures qu'on mettait en place pour être sûr qu'on saurait s'adapter à l'évolution du marché. Et on voit bien qu'aujourd'hui, notamment par rapport à ce que l'on peut faire pour le compte de l'ingénierie EDF auprès de la DIN, on continue à plutôt bien fonctionner. Alors certes, c'est ce qui était évoqué précédemment, c'est qu'on est sur des processus relativement longs, parce qu'on est aussi des concurrents par ailleurs sur certains marchés, donc il faut qu'on arrive à se faire confiance sur ceux qu'on adresse de manière conjointe. Et pour l'instant, ça a montré que ça pouvait fonctionner à condition de bien poser les règles et de bien démarrer. Alors maintenant, comme j'entendais que pour Boccard avec Cavendish, au bout de 4 ans de fiançailles, le mariage était fait, comme on en est à 3-4 ans au sein de notre JV avec Atkins, on peut peut-être espérer que 2015 sera peut-être l'année de l'arrivée de la NAAA auprès de NNB.
Yeah, it's always good when a fiancé ends in a mariage. Yes. Can I just ask you perhaps a slightly impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway? Is you know, the dream, I think, of all of us, I think probably, I hope most people in this room, is that we can turn this Franco-British partnership, these very concrete joint ventures, into something which works in third markets. I mean, it's quite a long-term perspective, but I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on whether, you know, whether it's too soon to even think about that, or whether it's something that's sort of already in your thinking. Whether we're in the nuclear field or whether indeed taking those ventures beyond. Jason, do you want to say something? You look like you're keen to say something on that, so I'll give you the opportunity.
Well, perhaps...
keen was the wrong word, clearly.
Colleagues, yeah. That is a very difficult one. I think on the one hand, we have really got an enormous project in Hinkley Point C ahead of us right now. And for the UK, that's extraordinarily important. But nevertheless, I think we are beginning to see some of the levels of understanding and trust building up between how our companies can work together. And that's been, you know, it's not a quick process. And it's not necessarily not a quick process because we are very different. The heritage of approaches to safety, engineering discipline, technical rigour are very, very similar. We both have an enormous deep nuclear heritage which serves us very, very well. So I think it's very positive what we may be able to accomplish through a few years' worth of conversation, learning how to talk and understand and get through some of those barriers. Interestingly, I asked my team, what would you say are some of the differences in terms of our culture? And one of the things that they consistently bring up is communication. I'm not sure I can actually tell you many of the things they said because I'm in danger of offending almost everyone, including myself, in that particular regard. But simple things, like when we in Britain use the word interesting, it doesn't necessarily mean that we find it interesting. And in many ways, I actually learned to work with French colleagues, and being clearer and crisper on yes, no, and let's move on is a very good learning experience. So I think I'm very positive that this experience of preparing for a project like Hinkley Point C, and in our case, some of the work that we've done in other environments working with French companies will stand us in good stead. And certainly as I look to the future, I can see some of the conversations that we're having right now with colleagues in AREVA looking at international markets. I don't know what the future holds for us. I think one thing I would say, and perhaps I don't mean this to sound like a negative point, but the one thing that I think we genuinely have to face up to is that in the long run, the landscape of the nuclear industry will look very, very different. The competition is going to become fiercer for these projects in every way. So competitiveness and being innovative and making sure our capabilities speak to what's required by customers in the future is probably the most important point. So right now we've got an opportunity to succeed in something extremely important. We've got an opportunity to build multiple collaborations at different levels in the supply chain. And I think we've got a chance to show that we are genuinely capable of delivering large projects, important and complicated projects and then taking some of those relationships into third countries. And I feel very confident about that, but we must face up to the fact that the nuclear industry of the future isn't going to be like the nuclear industry of the past.
Bruno, would you comment on that too?
Oui, en plus des 4 ans de bidding qui nous ont permis de mieux se connaître et mieux se structurer avec Cavendish, il y a aussi un élément majeur que EDF NNB a amené pour faciliter en fait la construction de la confiance. C'est le type de contrat dans lequel nous allons travailler, qui est le NEC, le NEC. Ce contrat nous oblige à être transparent, puisque on doit absolument montrer à EDF quelle est la structure de nos coûts. Et donc, ça nous a permis, avec Cavendish, de montrer qui on était et comment on était structuré dans la structure de nos coûts et comment on devait travailler pour garantir un coût total installé le plus compétitif possible. Donc, je pense que le NEC, et Marc pourrait peut-être en parler, c'est un élément différenciant qui est innovant, qui a marché sur les Jeux Olympiques de Londres. Et on est assez confiant maintenant qu'on a compris que ça va être un outil qui va nous permettre, de garantir la confiance et la maîtrise des coûts.
Oui, je pense que c'est un point, je vais montrer que je sais parler français aussi, même après 3 ans en Angleterre. Je pense que c'est un point extrêmement important, le type de contrat. J'ai débarqué en Angleterre il y a 3 ans, pour moi c'était le pays des contrats. La naissance des contrats. Et je découvre le NEC. Le NEC est un vrai contrat. Mais ça s'appelle le New Engineering and Construction Contract. C'est un contrat qui peut se lire. C'est un contrat que tout le monde qui a la prétention de faire un projet ou de travailler sur un projet peut lire et peut comprendre. Sans l'aide d'un avocat, sans l'aide d'une fortune de lawyers pour comprendre toutes les lignes. Et je pense que c'est le résultat d'un certain pragmatisme par rapport à un certain nombre d'années en arrière où des projets de construction en Angleterre se sont pas bien passés en termes de qualité, de tenue des délais, de dépassement des coûts. Et je crois même que sur certains projets comme Wembley, il y a encore des choses qui se gèrent au tribunal, alors que le stade marche depuis des années. Sur les Jeux Olympiques, il y a eu une seule claim. Donc il y a eu un seul sujet, un seul contentieux juridique. Et l'ensemble des contrats, ou la grande majorité, était géré par le NEC. Donc l'intérêt du contrat NEC, c'est un contrat qui permet une relation contractuelle sans intermédiaire d'un avocat et qui a des mécanismes extrêmement simples. Quelque chose qui est utile, c'est ce qu'on appelle le early warning. Si l'une des deux parties voit quelque chose qui peut créer un problème dans le futur, il y a 2 attitudes. Où on le cache et on le dit tout de suite à son avocat des 2 côtés, au cas où ça se passe mal en disant je m'en doutais. Ou alors, et c'est ce qu'il y a dans le NEC, on est obligé de le mettre sur la table. Et on dit, voilà, j'ai ce problème-là, ce sujet-là va tomber dans 3 semaines, je le mets sur la table et il y a une obligation dans le contrat de chercher ensemble une solution. Et ensuite, il y a des mécanismes contractuels qui font, comme l'expliquait Bruno, qui font que les gens sont rémunérés pour le travail qu'ils font. Et donc, on accepte, si les choses sont justifiées et dans le cadre de l'esprit du contrat, de payer ce qui est fait. Donc c'est très difficile à résumer. Je pense que c'est vraiment pour ceux qui s'intéressent au marché UK. Il y a plein de formations, il y a plein de choses qui existent sur la place publique. C'est un point extrêmement important. Juste pour répondre à la question sur les perspectives internationales. Je pense qu'elles seront évidentes si on réussit ce projet. Je pense qu'elles seront évidentes si on arrive à montrer que tout ce qu'on explique là sur scène, on arrive à le faire et que le projet est livré en temps, en heure, avec le niveau de qualité. Et effectivement, tous, que ce soit EDF, AREVA, tous les partenaires, on pourra dire qu'on a fait partie d'une aventure formidable et on aura indéniablement un atout pour montrer qu'on peut le faire à l'export. Si on arrive à faire quelque chose avec la complexité de la réglementation, avec l'histoire industrielle qu'il y a au UK, c'est quelque chose qui sera certainement exportable. Mais j'allais dire, jouons les choses dans l'ordre, montrons qu'on y arrive, montrons qu'on fait ce projet, et après, oui, je pense que ça sera une carte de visite dont on sera tous fiers, et à titre personnel également. Voilà, c'était ma réponse à votre question.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm, as ever, diplomats always getting too far ahead of the game. But anyway, so thank you for that, putting me back in my box. Rob, would you agree with that assessment? That, yeah. I guess we've sort of been skirting around this question of differences of culture. You talked a little bit about contract law, which is obviously a specificity of the UK system. I just wonder whether we can perhaps pinpoint some of the other areas where, and we talked this morning about some of the regulatory issues where there are some differences. But of course, there are quite a lot of cultural differences in the way we think of business, think of projects as well. I just wondered whether we can, without sort of causing massive offence to each other and other people in the room, whether we can perhaps get some of those out on the table. I don't know who would like to start. That's probably probably an unfair question. Who would like to start? But Jason, you're looking very, very keen again.
I think I have very carefully broached this subject in an earlier answer. I think we've heard some of it actually. I mean, culture works at multiple levels. We fundamentally do projects a little bit differently. We think about procurement with the same legislation and the same intent, but we do it differently. I think we build trust differently. I think we, frankly, sometimes have conversations where people in the room want a different type of conversation, whether it's a little bit, I'm not going to say which is which, by the way, but, you know, sometimes it feels that one is a little bit more business orientated, one's a little bit more technical orientated at different times, which can lead to misunderstandings. But it just is a matter of the similarities are in fact so great that nothing along the way ever really seems to me to get in the way of ultimately performing. But nevertheless, it doesn't feel right to think about something where you do one thing once. I think you have to sort of build a level of trust. You have to learn how to work together. You have to deal very frankly and very directly. And as I said, we Brits are sometimes not as frank and as direct. But nevertheless, projects get done better and more successfully if you very early identify and deal with the issues that are going to get in the way of success. We've just had a conversation there. You asked about approaches to third countries. Well, I'll be blunt. I mean, I can't really conceive of a future where we're not successful with Hinkley Point C. But actually, for third countries, I don't want to wait for Hinkley Point C to be complete before we're working in partnership and in collaboration in third countries. Because, you know, we're an international business today, and we want to develop and grow an international business, and we have deep-rooted roots in the French nuclear industry. And some of that, I believe, we've got more potential to capitalise on now, internationally, than maybe we've managed to achieve. So for me, that's a kind of perhaps a cultural point. We can just take our goal and focus on it. So I'm certainly not going to get into stereotypes and anything like that from a cultural standpoint, but I've always thought the similarities are greater and of much more interest than where we have some differences. And in all the conversations with my French colleagues, I watched them work with people from the US, people from the UK, and these project teams work very, very well and very effectively.
It's clearly a cliche that you mentioned this point about one side thinking more in terms of business outcomes, strategic outcomes, and another side thinking more in terms of, you know, technical, is this damn thing going to work? Marc, you see a lot of this. I mean, I know EDF in the UK give this enormous amount of thought. You invest a lot of money into it, actually, in trying to resolve some of these issues. I'd be really interested to have your perspective on, I mean, it is a cliche, but they're not unbridgeable gaps. I mean, how do you go about bridging some of those gaps?
So it's true, it's part of the cliche, but on the day-to-day, I like the word misunderstanding, because we have a lot. And I think what we try to put in front of misunderstanding is trust. And what I've seen coming back on the joint venture, and then I will expand on the teams, the best joint venture is when there is a real trust between the partners, and enough trust to say, I don't agree, you're wrong, I will do it differently, and to avoid misunderstanding, which for me is the open door to issues in the future. It's easy to give the image you agree, but then you create something for the future. And I think what we do in the team really is to have this on a day-to-day basis and on a very, very high level of scrutiny. A simple image, just last week, company send a very polite note in English, because they write to EDF Energy, we demand a meeting with EDF Energy. And part of my British colleagues had the same reaction, say, you don't demand a meeting with EDF Energy. When this person was genuinely demandé un rendezvous, which is very polite way to ask a meeting. So I had to say to manager, calm down, it's just asking to meet you. And this is the type of thing that, although it's a joke, it happened very often. And I think the more we go into technical discussion, the more we have people not so comfortable with the language and dealing with very, very tricky issues, the more we have to help them and to make sure that if there is a discrepancy, then we can discuss and escalate that. But I think we managed to solve most of the misunderstanding and to focus on the few really discrepancies. And I really think there is two ways to see it, whether it's an issue, because it takes time, energy, whether it's a chance. And I think it could be, I think the best way I personally see it as a chance. I mean, it's amazing to see what we can do together, taking the skills of one side or the others. And I was the other day on my way to Somerset. I stopped in Bristol, and I saw Concorde. Because there is still a Concorde in Bristol, if you were not aware. And I was surprised, because for me, I saw one in Charles de Gaulle, and I realized that I've been explained that, yeah, the Concorde, I know the story of the Concorde, and I think at that time they faced exactly the same challenges, with exactly the same culture, technical gaps, affordability, something which was really, for some other people, difficult to achieve, and they made it. And I think when I look at that, we made it in the past, in the Anglo-French collaboration, and today we are starting to make it again. And again, cultural differences, yes, a lot of jokes and very funny moments. And let's be positive and overcome this to make sure that people working together, achieving the same target with a high respect, for me it's the best solution to go forward.
Thank you, Mark. Perhaps we can end the discussion on that very positive note, which is, you know, my entire working life has revolved around getting the most out of both cultures, and I absolutely agree with that. It is an opportunity. We are better together than separate, and that's absolutely the case. We have a little bit of time for questions, so I thought there would be a good time to, either on that theme or anything that we have covered on the panel, or indeed have not covered, please do feel free to ask a question, either of the panel generally, and I'll allot the question to some hapless individual, or to a named individual. Ça.
Vous avez beaucoup parlé de différences culturelles, mais c'est quoi? Est-ce que finalement, toutes ces discussions, ça aboutit à des perfectionnements techniques, à des idées, à des échanges améliorant le projet lui-même, techniquement?
Would anyone like to take that? You know, picking up really what Marc was saying, that you know, together we actually do something better.
Oui, je pense. Je peux pas vous donner d'exemples concrets parce qu'on n'est peut-être pas encore dans ce niveau de détail sur tous les contrats. Mais juste pour vous montrer, on parlait ce matin du régulateur et de l'ONR. Je pense qu'il y a eu des dialogues techniques extrêmement, et je sais qu'il y a eu des dialogues techniques extrêmement poussés entre des gens experts de la réglementation britannique que nous avons recrutés, qui travaillent chez AREVA et chez certains de nos grands fournisseurs, pour répondre aux questions légitimes du régulateur anglais par rapport aux produits EPR. Et ça a apporté des remises en cause et des évolutions techniques pour le bien du produit, pour qu'il soit commercialisable sur le marché UK. Donc je pense que oui, ce dialogue-là, s'il est bien pris, peut amener à des améliorations. Et de façon plus prosaïque, c'est pas de la technique nucléaire de base, mais quand on veut tirer des câbles, faire du piping comme on le fait avec les partenaires, je pense qu'il y a des vraies innovations et des vrais avantages à travailler ensemble avec des grands professionnels qui, par la force des choses, ne sont jamais rencontrés. Et comme le disait Bruno Boccard, quand on fait des choses dans des sous-marins nucléaires et qu'on travaille avec des professionnels du secteur nucléaire en France, il y a quand même quelque chose, en tout cas vu de ce qu'on pousse nous, qui va en sortir en termes d'innovation technique et de faire en sorte que les équipes délivrent des choses. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des exemples plus concrets à vous donner, mais je pense qu'on est sur la route d'avoir des choses qui vont délivrer de l'innovation.
Dans 15 jours, le crunch Angleterre-France, c'est peut-être le seul sujet où vous n'êtes pas d'accord. C'est pas grave. Imaginons un petit peu une équipe de rugby où on réunirait les meilleurs joueurs britanniques et français, tous sélectionneurs en rêveraient. Ce que vous êtes en train de faire là, c'est pas un petit peu pareil là, la meilleure équipe qu'on pourrait rêver avec les meilleurs du nucléaire britannique et français?
I may ask a Scotsman to answer that question.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be in that team, I have to say. So I think the concept is exactly the way to look at it. I quite like Marc's example there of GDA. So GDA is a different type of process to go through. Having been involved in some of the early stages of that as an organisation with the incoming project, I'm absolutely convinced it revealed a number of improvements which, coupled together with the learning from earlier projects, will stand the project in good stead. As an engineering organisation, as a manufacturing delivery organisation, we fundamentally believe that you've got to really have open dialogue about issues that you will face in a project or technical issues at the earliest possible opportunity. We have a saying inside the company that we are very proud of the voice of one, the person who will sit in a room and take a contrary position of something that is actually imperative, and will voice that concern until it's run down and exhausted and you know you've dealt with it. Dealing with these issues matter enormously. That's what we've found through both that process and in some of the conversations, the technical teams coming together with actually, quite frankly, a different outlook. And that different outlook can matter a great deal.
Thank you. Anne McLaughlin, former Bureau Chief, Pletz Nuclear Publications. I'm not going to speak the language of Shakespeare either. And I wonder if Shakespeare actually spoke here, if anybody would understand him. Okay. You're not talking a lot about money, but somebody did mention that a lot of money has been spent already in preparation and in the run-up to what is hoped to be the final investment decision. So I have actually two questions. The first one is, has anybody made a global estimate, an overall estimate of how much has been spent by all the parties to be ready when the starting gun is fired? And the second one has to do with the international prospects. Perhaps it's been partly answered, but Marc Lachaise, I believe, said that it is when Hinkley Point will have been a success that the teams can go forward out into the rest of the world, the French-British teams. And I think Jason Smith said, well, we'd like it to be before that. But my question is, at what point can it be concluded that Hinkley Point is a success?
I think on your first question, I'm afraid, on amounts of money spent, I think we get into slightly difficult commercial territory. So I think it'd be an unfair question to the panel members, if you'll forgive me. But I don't think we can, it's really a very difficult question to answer. On the second question, where do we declare victory? At what point do we declare victory? My simple mind would say when some electricity comes out the other end, but maybe that's perhaps a little bit arbitrary.
Yeah, just to explain on my idea, it was to say, I think the sooner we can go abroad together, the better, but we have something to show. And then the question is, when do we think we have something? And I think it would be the market abroad who's going to tell us, okay, you're bringing your added value and you will win shares. So I think we cannot put really a date. I think it depends on the type of company and the type of project. But my point was only to say, when there is something to show and a result, which is not only receiving a contract for EDF, but delivering something contract for EDF, could be design, or it could be up to the end. And then time will come to have really a commercial strong point to go broad. So it was just to clarify what I said.
There's also that there's also the fact that the market has been facilitated and set up by the UK government and other UK stakeholders. This is very important, and success will be actually, you might say, when FID is declared. At that stage, all of the work that's been done by UK government and ministers and governments before that will have been a success, because the project then starts. After that, as Marc says, it then depends what area you're going into, what you do, and what the abroad are looking for as being success before they employ.
Maybe to answer on your first question, without talking about numbers, yes, it's been expensive, but I think looking at it on the project perspective, we should look at it as spending but investment. It's a huge project. We needed, I think, as a team, to prepare for the project, transferring, adapting the safety codes from the French to the UK norms, preparing for the supply chain management to be ready for the project with the client, and preparing for the partners within the supply chain management to work together. I think that was a prerequisite to the success of the project. I think the time and money will be a right investment for the project.
I think we've probably got time for one last question, Valérie. Yeah.
Oui, bonjour. Moi, je m'interrogeais justement sur les rapports que peuvent avoir vos différentes sociétés. Vous êtes un peu dans des rapports des fois d'associés rivaux. En fin de compte, vous vous retrouvez sur certaines affaires à coopérer ensemble, et sur d'autres, en parallèle, vous pouvez effectivement vous opposer. Et je voulais savoir comment vous faisiez, parce que effectivement, on peut essayer de s'affranchir, pallier les divergences, les incompréhensions qui peuvent surgir, voire parfois ça peut créer des moments ludiques assez drôles, il peut y avoir des éclairs de génie, ou alors des fois des éclairs plutôt dans le sens du clash, de l'algarade. Mais comment est-ce que vous faites pour dépasser les choses qui peuvent être un peu moins nobles, les sentiments un peu moins nobles que sont les arrière-pensées, en fait? Vos rapports sont comment? C'est peut-être la segmentation du business en affaires qui vous aide là-dessus. Vous êtes sur une affaire et vous oubliez le reste. Enfin, ça se passe comment on oublie les arrière-pensées et les compétitions?
Rob, would you like to?
It's a good question. It's a fair question. In the United States, they have a very good term for it. It's called competitors and mates. And frankly, we're used to doing it. We're totally used to doing it. In some areas, we'll be bidding against each other, and in some areas, we'll be partners or JVs or subcontractors. It's a normal part of business.
Yeah, I think I can only echo that comment. It really isn't easy at all. But nevertheless, this is something that industrial companies just have to contend with. I think it comes down to trust, transparency. You build relationships that can be as long as a project. That project then might lead into something more substantial. The next time that you meet that company, you may well be in fair and open competition with them. I think I maybe just reflect on one of the comments I made earlier. As we look at how the nuclear industry is going to change, then it's going to be very fiercely fought globally, moving from the west to the east, and different competitors to those that we've been used to historically. I think we're going to have to become very skilled and very accomplished in building partnerships. To be a successful company in the future means it's going to have to be one of our core skills, how we entertain the fact that on this occasion we are competing, and yet on another occasion that may be happening at the same time in a different region, we are actually working together for the success of a project. I think that's just the future of the industry and the future of business.
Guillaume.
Pour compléter éventuellement, puisque pour le coup, en tant que société d'ingénierie, si on regarde la joint venture que nous avons avec Atkins, il y a effectivement plein de zones sur lesquelles on va être en compétition permanente. Et en fait, de ce point de vue-là, les Anglais sont beaucoup plus pragmatiques que nous, société française, sur le fait qu'à un moment donné, ce qui importe, c'est qu'est-ce qu'on délivre aux clients. Alors ça peut paraître un peu pompeux en disant « ouais, bon, c'est bien sur le papier », mais c'est juste une réalité. C'est-à-dire que quand, au final, vous avez un client en face de vous qui s'appelle EDF ou qui s'appelle AREVA, vous ne pouvez pas juste faire semblant de coucher sur le papier une règle de bonne conduite pour la conduite du projet, et puis en fait dans la réalité délivrer quelque chose qui est fondamentalement différent. Donc de ce point de vue-là, c'est pour ça que je disais tout à l'heure, il faut que les règles au départ soient claires, pour que chacun mobilise les compétences qui sont en adéquation avec celles dont on a besoin pour la réussite du projet. Mais in fine, ce qui fait le juge de paix, c'est le service qu'on rend au client. Et sur un certain nombre de marchés, même franco-français, on peut être amené à traiter des sujets en coopération avec certains de nos concurrents par ailleurs sur d'autres projets. Mais voilà, y a pas, ça n'a jamais posé de problème majeur, en tout cas pour nous côté Assystem. Et quand on parlait des forces ou des faiblesses, ou qu'est-ce qu'on retire, notamment dans la coopération franco-britannique, on remarque que les Anglais sont beaucoup plus pragmatiques, ça génère beaucoup plus facilement des échanges sur ce besoin-là, pour ce projet-là. On pourrait très bien être en association avec telle ingénierie, et puis pour tout autre besoin, se mettre avec une autre ingénierie, si in fine, ça nous permet d'apporter un service et de réussir le projet du client.
D'où ce que vous disiez aussi sur l'importance des nouvelles régulations, de nouveaux modes de coopération, qui sont tout ce qui est pré-cadrage, etc. Enfin, de choses plus informelles qui finalement aident à la formalisation.
Tout à fait.
Ouais.
Jason, you wanted to add something? Yes,
just a very minor. Guillaume made me think. Just to be very specific, I used the word trust, but actually we're pragmatic, but we're also very practical because we are used to this. So, what it does mean is you have to protect commercial information, secure information, and you have to be able to demonstrate that to multiple parties. So trust in reality has to be earned, kept, and with a very strong ethical code behind it. So there are some real practical measures that build trust and lead to you being able to be pragmatic at different times.
Okay, thank you. I think our time is up, so I just, if I may, thank you all gentlemen very much for making this a good session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all our panelists, and thank you very much.